I know One Punch Man has really cool fights and just beautiful artwork as you can see on screen, but can we just take a moment to talk about the 10 out of 10 character development? I know that there's a lot of people out there that just look at One Punch Man, when they read this content, they digest the content, they look at it as if like, oh, it's just, a fighting manga. And yes, there's a lot of fighting. I mean, this entire chapter is basically a straight up fight. It's beautiful artwork, back to back, beautiful panels that just straight up, it just like, I could not imagine how hard it would be to adapt this into an anime. It is incredible in terms of just how beautiful One Punch Man always is every single time a chapter comes out. But obviously, with all of this crazy stuff going on, I mean, like the serious sneeze that happens on later in the chapter, like this serious sneeze that he does on Jupiter. Obviously, everybody, you're going to be talking about the feats. They're going to be talking about the strength that Saitama wielded within this chapter, to even the funny gag moments of, serious fart and, the sneeze, to just these little things here and there throughout the chapter. Everybody's going to be focusing on that, which is understandable because it is a huge part of One Punch Man. But I think one thing in particular that really stood out to me, which I'm going to zoom to right now, I'm about to show you, is probably this scene right quick, when Garo sees the boy that he's been basically watching over since this arc began, which was years ago technically in the One Punch Man manga, and he sees the boy is dead. Legitimately, he freaks out, he's running away, and then Saitama, is like, why are you running away? He's crying, he's distraught, but there's just so much to this scene, which I'll talk about in a second. But one thing in particular about this entire dialogue is basically saying, you've been really acting weird ever since you fell down from the sky. Are you some weirdo didn't do something to you? Are you sure some weirdo didn't do something to you? If they did, it's because my spirit was too weak. And then he starts to go on about, Saitama, hero, etc., true evil, and then he's like, Saitama replies, you wanted to save him? You weren't just clinging to him for support. And Garo turns around and looks at him and is like, what would you know? And then obviously when he looks at, Saitama, he sees Saitama holding, Genos' core. And I think this is a very huge moment for this chapter, and I think this entirety of this arc, and just One Punch Man in general, because if there's one thing that the actual writer of One Punch Man has always been about when he writes his stuff like Mob Psycho and, One Punch Man, yes, there is a lot of power scaling, yes, there is a lot of fights, but he really shows a lot of humanity. He puts a lot of humanity in these characters, and you can look at the entire ordeal with Garo in this chapter, him choosing his humanity over his evil/villainous side, or monster side. And then you see Saitama, he slowly is slipping into the dark realm, or like a monstrous realm, because of this chapter, and the only thing that's kind of grounding him in reality is literally Genos. And I love everything about this chapter, what it represents, and what these pages represent, because obviously, when you're reading this series, as I've already talked about, you're quick to forget about these things. It's very simple to overlook these character interactions and not think too deeply about what really is going on here, because let's be honest, a lot of people that probably read One Punch Man come for the fight, so like, that's cool, and then they carry on with their day. They don't think really too deep about it, and they don't care too much about it. They just like the really cool art and panels and fights, and they move on with their lives, which there's nothing wrong with reading One Punch Man like that. But obviously, there is an extra layer, a deep layer underneath all of this that is being told. And I really appreciate, like, for instance, like, if you go back, I think this is a really good part to kind of explain. When, the strength levels of Saitama was getting so absurd, like this right here, the scaling, it was getting so absurd that no matter what Garo was doing, eventually just the gap between the two became so crazy that basically even a sneeze could wipe Garo out, where Garo would just be obliterated into space dust. And I think this is a really good turning point to show a few things. Obviously, that Saitama, he is growing. He isn't actually stagnant in just at the threshold, like a level that's, as strong as can be, and he's there. Basically, like, he isn't the strongest he can be. He's always actually growing. He's always getting stronger. And that's what this chapter definitely showcases, that Saitama is getting stronger. He is not actually the strongest. He's just getting stronger exponentially. And obviously, this still plays into the tropes of, like, he will always be stronger than his opponent, etc. But it adds a lot more clarity to Saitama's strength. That he is someone that isn't actually the strongest already. He's just getting stronger. And so he can technically still train. He can technically still reach new heights, new levels, and peaks that nobody has ever seen before. And obviously, he was getting to that threshold within the chapter. But before we go any deeper in this, what makes this relevant to what I was just talking about with the character development is that Saitama, with this monstrous power, with this ability to basically ascend into godhood itself, like the man literally was able to replicate a technique and use time travel. And I'll talk more about that in a second as well. There is a lot about this chapter, but he uses a technique that Garo shows him, and he's able to perfectly replicate it, even if he doesn't understand the full concept of it, and he's able to reverse the flow of time, go back in the past and fix everything. And his power, it was basically on par with the power of God itself that, has bestowed power to Garo within the manga. And so when you think about that, it's ridiculous how strong he is. And obviously, if you get to that certain level, power could potentially corrupt you. I mean, there's no way someone with that level of strength, that level of power, to be able to basically challenge the strongest entity of all of creation could not potentially eventually lose sight of humanity itself, lose sight of what really it means to be human. Because if you're at that point in life where literally a fart can travel you from, let's say, Jupiter to the Earth, that says enough of just how far gone you are from humanity. You're no longer human. The man legitimately, when you really take a hard look at this chapter and what it really tries to showcase, and obviously it's cool feats, it's funny feats, it's gags, etc., it opens up a very sad future for Saitama. Technically, he doesn't probably even need to eat. Like, seriously, think about this. The man was in space. No spacesuit, nothing. Completely nude. And obviously, yes, you can look at everything that happened within this chapter as a gag. Definitely. It was definitely there for a gag. But when you really think about the sheer complexity of it, the man didn't have any protection from, like, cosmic radiation. He didn't have protection from the space itself and the vacuum of space being able to suck out his organs or whatever. The man probably doesn't need to eat. He doesn't really need to breathe. He doesn't really need to worry about anything. He literally is a god in a man's body. And it's sad because the man is so strong that, once again, you would lose sight of yourself. You would lose sight of what it means to be human. And Genos, this is what makes it very symbolic, is that Genos' core here, with him holding Genos' core, it's basically like he's holding on to the only thing that grounds him to reality, to be human, which is his friend Genos. And it's ironic that Genos is a robot. I think that's a huge thing. It's the irony of the situation, but I think it's incredibly powerful. This is a very powerful chapter just to show how lonely of existence that Saitama has. So yes, we've known he's had a lonely existence in terms of being strong, but when you really just look at this chapter, he is something so much more, and he really is someone that can barely relate with others. And I find this chapter incredibly depressing. It's a very sad chapter, honestly, just seeing it. Like, Saitama's capabilities of being pretty much evil is definitely there. And I think maybe one day that will be something that might happen, who knows, but it's a really fascinating chapter. I really like what this series has done in these past few chapters. The character development is absolutely insane. And then obviously the Garo stuff. Like, I want to talk about Garo's development for a second. So, like, Garo's development here, like, creating, like, a time-traveling, thing using, like, antimatter and, regular matter, antiparticles, etc. to be able to go back in the past. Him choosing his human side. I think this is a very big detail that many might overlook, and I think that this is a very beautiful moment for Garo, because obviously one of the big things that's always been his driving force is the kid, and seeing basically that, the kid is gone, dead, the entire world is dead, etc., it can lead to a lot of sadness. It can lead to just, like, basically just straight up, it's a tragedy. It legitimately is a tragedy. And I feel so bad for Garo, but he makes the right decision by actually wanting to go back and have himself stopped. And I think that's a very impactful moment, because he picks humanity. He picks his human side over anything else, and he realizes that he never probably could be the ultimate villain, because for one, I mean, Saitama literally said he's not a good hero, even though he's the one that's besting Garo, so Garo can't even have the pride and happiness that he was bested by a hero. Just Saitama is the complete opposite of everything Garo wanted, and he crushed Garo's dreams to such a point that he had to choose humanity. I think this is a really good moment of the chapter. I absolutely love this. It's a really solid character development moment. Now, let's go a little bit further. Let's obviously talk about what happens here with the time travel. So Saitama, travels back in the past, and there's a few things you can gather from this. Obviously, you can view this entire time point of him going back in the past maybe as an alternate reality. Maybe he's going into a different reality itself, parallel universe, or he really is resetting time itself. Obviously, time travel is very difficult, it's convoluted, and there's many ways that time travel can be tackled within a story. There's really so many different ways, and it's not perfect as well, and they can lead to a lot of issues too. But clearly, it makes sense that time travel is one of the only ways to be able to correct the damage that happened to the planet Earth. Because, I mean, for one, the radiation. I talked about this when it happened 2 chapters ago, with Child Emperor and other characters basically experiencing radiation where their hair is falling out and all that. They've already gotten such a lethal dose of radiation that they were all going to die. When you see fish on the beach basically lying there dead, you see the planet basically looking really decayed or dead, it just shows how much radiation was on the planet. And so because of that, there was just no way that that was going to be corrected by just some random stuff. Yeah, as I said, it was a manga, and there's powers, etc. But the only thing that would make logical sense to really correct everything would be actually resetting everything in terms of time travel. And that does indeed happen. I am thankful for the fact that it technically wasn't Saitama that initiated the time travel. I'm happy that it was Garo that did it, because once again, it plays with the character development, and it shows that it wasn't just an easy cop-out, because obviously Saitama probably wasn't even going to think of that. He probably wasn't going to think about time travel or anything like that. He just piggybacked on what Garo said, and then he did it, and here we are. I think that this is just a really good way to use time travel. It's not perfect, but I think it's a good way to use it. And obviously, Saitama bringing back Genos' core as well. I think that this is something that's probably going to play a huge role in the future for a few reasons. Maybe this core might hold the memories of the future, or where Saitama just came from, and maybe he'll be able to show everybody what actually happened, maybe Garo what actually happened, or maybe Genos is going to get a massive upgrade and he's going to be able to use both of these cores. Whatever the case may be, I do think that this is probably going to be a huge plot point in the upcoming chapters. Now, another thing too, though, it does show that Garo did actually successfully kill everybody. So I guess you could say in terms of like villains and all that, he really was a big bad. He killed everybody. He killed the planet. So yeah. Now another thing, Blast. That's another thing to wonder about, is that Blast technically is not in this chapter, at least from what I can see. And it's sad, because it's like, we know Blast is definitely strong. I talked about this in my previous chapter reviews. I mean, he was able to kind of hold back Garo and Saitama's punches from really straight up destroying the planet instantly and warp them, etc., which showed that Blast is incredibly strong. He isn't a pushover. He isn't someone that you could just say, oh, he's just a regular S-class hero. He's definitely in a league of his own, potentially near the level of Garo and Saitama. And so when you see how he's not in this chapter, it makes you wonder. Since he's technically a warp reality bender type person that's able to open up gates and portals and different realities, it makes you wonder if he's going to be able to remember anything that happened in these past few chapters, or is his mind going to be completely reset as well? So many questions. But for now, though, I'm just going to say that this is a fantastic chapter of One Punch Man, and I mean, obviously, there's a lot of funniness in this, like serious fart, etc. But I think, though, one of the big factors of this chapter that I think I just truly appreciate is the straight-up character development and kind of the conclusion to this arc. Honestly, it's basically the conclusion. I really, really, really like this arc. Like, it's just so good. Seeing Saitama basically best Garo to such a degree, and Garo realizing, like, he can't do anything, the gap is just too wide. That's another thing to talk about. And speak of gap too wide, I think this is another little moment that will easily go under the radar, and I almost forgot to talk about it. So obviously we can see the gap here of Saitama's power and Garo's, and I want you to notice something. Obviously early on in the chapter, you see Saitama, he's basically serious. Like, look at Saitama's face. He has this serious expression. He's going in against Garo. He's fighting him. You see the straight up just power of fighting Garo. But then as the gap widens, you see Saitama slowly, he actually goes into more of a derpy mode. Like, look at this. He goes into a derpy-looking face and mode, and he doesn't even look at Garo. He just grabs Garo's fist while having a derpy-looking face, and then he starts sneezing, etc. And everything about this does paint quite a picture. Yes, once again, it's funny. It's used for a gag. But I think a big part of this was to showcase that the gap between Garou and Saitama is just so large now that Saitama just didn't even need to focus. He didn't even need to care about Garou anymore. He was basically an ant in comparison to him, and basically the challenge was just no longer there. He didn't care anymore. He didn't really actually have to use serious punches or anything, because obviously, you know, he didn't need to try. And I think this shows a really good change in expression, that despite, you know, him having that a lot of that anger and, you know, malice within his face, he went very derpy because there was no longer any challenge or any fun anymore because of just how the fight, the power gap just grew exponentially. So yeah, there's a lot to really get from this. I really, really like this chapter. I think that many could agree with me that this is probably one of the best One Punch Man chapters, actually, of this entire arc. This is a really good chapter. But I guess I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for watching. If you, enjoy my content and you enjoyed this video, you know, please do leave me a like. It does help me out a lot. But, with that, guys, be safe, stay healthy. Chibi out.